And now we're going to follow up with the second chapter. Now, you got the book and you have the videos, right, on a disc? Didn't it come with that?
The CD.
The CD? No?
I have a CD.
Yeah, mine came with a CD.
Yeah, some of you have CDs. You can watch this interview on your CD, and it'll give you a better feel for some of this. I encourage you to watch those. I'm not going to show them in here, but yeah, Burnett Pierce is on here. Now, this is a fellow who was a professor at a university out in California back in the 60s and 70s, when they were having a lot of fights on campus, a lot of student riots and sit-ins and demonstrations. And there would be, on one side of the street, there would be students picketing and shouting, and on the other side of the street, there'd be maybe, you know, National Guard or administration people shouting back at them. And so Burnett Pierce was a communication professor on that campus, and he asked himself, what's going on here? Right? Which is a theory question. You know, what's happening? How can I explain and describe what's going on here? How can I change what's happening here? Now, Burnett Pierce looked at what was going on with those students and the National Guard and the administration yelling at each other through the image of things like George Herbert Mead's social construction of self and social construction of the social world and the reflexive self. And he saw people interacting in a way that continued to create a undesirable outcome. Right? Just to pick up Mead's stuff again, that what exists in society or in a company or in a band or in a sorority or in a relationship exists because of the way people interact. The symbols that they interact around, the way they talk with each other. They create each other. Okay, so the students are shouting and, you know, yelling at the administration shouting, yelling. So you go talk to students and they say the administration doesn't listen to us. Well, they don't listen to us because of the way we're trying to talk to them. The administration says the students are unreasonable. Well, they're saying the students are unreasonable because they're not being reasonable in the conversation. So you've got yourself trapped in the creating together of something you don't want. And so Pierce asked himself, is there a way I could teach people to interact in new ways where they would think more carefully about what they create together? And that was what he tried to do. So for about, how long is that now? 37, 40 years. Pierce has been working on this coordinated management of meaning theory, where he says what we need to have happening in these groups that are fighting with each other is that they need to see that they have created this together and that they can create something different if they want to, and if they'll learn to talk to each other in different ways. So he calls that the coordinated management of meaning. So it's a very practical theory of communication. You know, Mead's thing is kind of like you have to push yourself a little bit to figure out how to apply it. But Pierce's coordinated management of meaning is meant to be applied. It's meant to change what happens in fights, in arguments, in different kinds of conflict situations. So Pierce at root looks at this. He looks at persons in conversation. This is what he's interested in. So he's not interested in the individual, and he's not interested in the fight as much as he's interested in, let me look at the people having a conversation. And that's one thing to him. People in conversation co-create, this is his language, we've brushed up against it, their social world. So like Prue, I think you were saying, you know, well, do people realize they're doing this? You know, well, no. Pierce says, no, they just think they're doing what's the right thing to do. Because, you know, we shout and yell, and they shout and yell, and we talk past each other, and nothing happens. So Pierce's argument is that persons in conversation co-create the social worlds that they then inhabit and that shape them. So it's a circular process. You create it, and then it creates you. And you either allow that cycle to continue, or you decide, no, we want to create a new social world. We'd rather change our conversation. We'd rather start a new way of talking and relating that creates a new way in which we live together, which creates us in a new way. So you see the way it's all tied in. It's all cycles that he tries to establish. So for Pierce, it's ways of talking and creating things. He said that communication at its roots is another way to solve problems instead of fighting. So for Pierce, this is kind of the distinction. Can we talk instead of fighting? And so he says that was what happened way back with Aristotle, is that, you know, they had to decide how to give the land out. And they could have had, you know, matches where they put two people in a ring with bats and the last person standing gets the land. Or you could talk. And so he sees this as very important, that they said, we face a problem where people are going to fight each other. Let's create a way to talk. So they created courts. Aristotle, back in Aristotle's time, the Greek city-states created the courts. So you would go and make your case, there would be a jury, you would make your case, and then they would decide. Pierce feels like we need some new ways of doing this now, because the courts are not managing to solve everything for us. So we need a new way of talking that will so we can create the worlds we want without fighting. So patterns of creation create shared social world. We co-create a social world with patterns. What are we co-creating? So this is a question that you might ask in your work with an organization. If you go to a group of people, you might ask them, what are you creating together here? As you interact, what's the outcome of it? Because you create that by the way you choose to interact. You say, well, the outcome of it is that we have cliques, and these people don't like these people, and we can't work together. So, okay, so well, then that's the outcome of the way you do it. What are we co-creating? How are we doing that? And how might we change in order to create a new social world, new organization, a new sorority, a new band, whatever it is? How might we change our communication patterns? So Pierce says you got to understand a couple things. He said when people say something, when they make a statement, they are acting in some way into the world. So if I say, I'm hungry, I want to go eat, that's an action. That's a statement of intention that lets everyone know what I intend to do. So Pierce says, you got to start thinking about words as actions. What is it people are trying to do? So if someone says you're an idiot to somebody else, you have to ask yourself, what are they trying to do? What is the action? Are they trying to, criticize? Are they trying to yeah, belittle, you find a verb that describes the action that's being taken. Because sometimes what you think is being done is not what's being done. You know, I mean, people could say that to each other if they're really good friends and someone says, "You're an idiot." That's a term of friendship in some contexts. Right? A term of endearment. So the speech act, the words that are spoken are really some kind of an action. And Pierce says you'll also understand it better if you understand that that action makes sense within an episode. That people define a kind of a frame for what they're doing. So this is an episode of conflict, for instance. So if I say, "You're an idiot," I have content, those are words. The act is to belittle you. The episode is that we're having a fight. And that takes place within a certain relationship. So you have some co-workers, fellow band members, fellow sorority members, people, boss to subordinate, you know, significant others. It has some relationship that's having an episode in which an act has just taken place. So he says you go out a little bit more, and that relationship is built on a sense of yourself concept. Who am I here? You know, I'm a worker, I'm a fellow fraternity member, you know, I'm the singer in the band, I'm the bassist in the band. What is my sense of self? When I think of myself. And that comes out of culture. Culture helps us to identify, give a name to who we are. We get our identity out of the larger culture. So this is very much a Mead kind of a thing, you know, a social constructionist self view. Pierce says if you'll think about these things, you will be less quick to take offense at other people. You'll understand better what they're doing when they say something. So his example, I think I've said this example here before, is the two people who are driving a car, and the one says to the other one, "Are you hungry?" And the other person says, "No, I'm not hungry." And then the response is, "You're so selfish." All right, so that's a typical example, and the typical response back from that is, "What?" Typical response is, all you ever do is think about yourself. So now you're into a
Must be a man.
exchange. Well, we'll see. So the content, let's track this back through this. The context is, are you hungry? Right? So are you hungry? Now, immediately we ask ourselves, what is the act that is being done? The form of the content is a question, right? But what is the act that's being, the speech act that's being offered? It's a statement, right? It's really a statement. It's not a question. It's a statement. It looks like a question, but its intended action is a statement. As part of an, right, it's a statement of saying, as part of an episode of us driving, and we've been on the road for a long time, that we have a relationship, you know, whatever that is, it would probably be significant others in that case. We have a sense of self concept of who we are, of what are the proper things for us to do, of who we are in relationship to this other person, and then it's affected by a cultural pattern. So you're right, in Pierce's case, in this case, it is a gender issue in this conversation. So the content, "Are you hungry?" is a speech act that looks like a question, but it's really a statement. An episode of a long drive where we're significant others. My self-concept is that I understand I am this kind of person in this relationship. I'm not the demander. I don't see myself as a demanding person. And the cultural pattern is that I shouldn't be preoccupied with food. That shouldn't be an important thing for me. So then you get into this relationship, and if you have thought about communication from coordinated management of meaning, you can begin to decipher what went on in that conversation. You begin to say, okay, so there was something culture, there was something of self-concept going on here, there's something of what's appropriate for what particular people to say in a particular thing. And so we end up doing analysis of how are all of these things impinging on the exchange that's going on. So again, if you're doing a sorority, you're doing a fraternity, you're doing a band, you're doing a workplace, all of those, there are certain cultural patterns about how things are supposed to go in that workplace. People have a sense of who they are. I'm a manager, I'm a worker. What does that mean? Well, I have to be directive, I have to be strong, I have to be distant. What does it mean? What kind of relationship am I in with this person? Am I a worker subordinate? Is it a peer? Is it my boss? What's the episode? You know, another case of this is when you're having a peer review or a performance review. Anybody work at a place where you get performance reviews? Right? So from the management's perspective, a performance review is an episode of structured part of your work expectation. You know, it's part of what we do. We look this over. From the worker's point of view, it's an episode of conflict. That you're going to accuse me of things, you're not going to appreciate what I do, you're going to put me down. And so if a worker comes in taking on the episode, this is a conflict, and the management comes thinking this is a standard procedure, we can predict that there's going to be conflict going on there. Because people have not coordinated the sense of the episode of what's happening, or coordinated the different parts of this. So what it does is it helps us to diagnose conflict. Are people thinking that the episode is different? Are they thinking that the relationship is different? Are they thinking the self-concept's different? They have different cultures. And so you use these to think. Someone says something to you, you relate back, they relate back, you say, I'm not understanding what's going on. Let's look at these things. You know, what were you trying to do with that statement? Explain to me what you were trying to do. So you move to meta-communication, you communicate about the communication. What were you trying to do? What do you think's going on here? What kind of thing are we doing here? What are we engaged in together here? Are we engaged in improvement of the company, or are we engaged in conflict between you and me? Let's clarify what's going on here. Let's clarify the relationship we have. You know, are we talking as friends, or are we talking as a man and a woman, or are we talking as a subordinate to a superior? What's the relationship in which I'll interpret this communication? I mean, you may have this at work. If you've ever worked with friends or worked under friends, you understand this. There are times when you want to talk as friends and you go out as friends, but then all of a sudden you start talking about work. And you start getting into a conflict about that. And Pierce would say that's because you're not clear about the episode in the relationship. Are we out, you know, socially as friends, or are we in an informal setting as fellow workers? Let's clear that up. because otherwise we're going to have conflict in this. So Pierce says all of these things enter into what goes on in a conversation as the words are exchanged. Think about this for you as grown adults now. You go home and you have a conflict with your parents, right? You went home and you said something that you thought was just some kind of a friendly statement, like you say, oh, I have to go back to school tomorrow afternoon. So it's a simple statement. You hear it as, what's the act you're performing? What's a verb that would describe? You're informing them. Yeah, you're informing. So you think, I'm informing. The act that I'm doing is I'm informing. It's part of an episode of a visit home. Part of a relationship is I'm a adult child of this family. My self-concept is that I'm, out on my own a bit. I'm beginning to take over my life, on my own. And the cultural pattern is a growing child leaving home. Okay. Now, you could get into a conflict over this. I don't know if this ever happened to you. You say, I have to be back at school tomorrow afternoon. And a parent might say, oh, okay, so you don't want to spend any time here. Right? They heard it as what?
Bragging.
What's that?
Bragging.
Okay, well, they heard it as
Temporary.
okay, as a separating statement. I'm only going to be here for a little while. Don't get used to this. I'm leaving. Right? You said, I'm telling you I'm going back to school. They heard, I'm separating. I'm leaving. So they heard a statement that was a boundary statement, drawing a line. Oh, you don't have enough time to spend with us. And you're like, what? What just happened? You're like, I just said, I have to be at school tomorrow. But what happened was they heard a different speech act being done. And they also think that it's a different episode. They think that what's going on is not just a friendly visit home, but that it's some kind of a short required visit. You're just coming because you feel like you have to come, because we bugged you enough to come. So you're thinking, hey, I'm making a nice visit home. They're thinking, well, finally came because we bugged enough or asked enough. So the episode is different.
So this is how you would view it under the coordinated management meaning theory?
Yeah, you try to take it apart.
This is how they would view it, though, as far as content, speech, act, episode, relationship.
Right. The content is, I have to be back at school tomorrow by noon, tomorrow. Mm-hmm. And so then the response back would be, oh, so you don't have time. We're not important. And that's where all of a sudden you start to realize, wait a minute, we are not coordinating our conversation here. Something is not clicking, we're not talking about the same thing. And Pierce gives you a way to take that apart and say, all right, maybe you're thinking that something different is going on. It could be, it'd be like a band, and one person thinks we're having a practice, and another person thinks I'm having a power struggle with so-and-so. You got two different episodes going on. Everybody else is like, we're having a practice. But this person is thinking, okay, what's going on here is a power struggle. So someone says something, and someone else responds some other way, like, yeah, like you always tell us how to do things around here. And everyone's like, what just happened? What's going on? And now we're into some conflict where people are trying to say things, but they're not understanding that the episode that is in view is different.
I have a question. You were saying before about what someone would state in the car if you said, "Are you hungry?"
Yeah.
I'm not hungry. And you would get into, you said meta communication, where you're
right.
speaking about the communication.
Right.
How do you engage with someone like that if they're not able to or willing to engage in meta communication? Because a lot of people aren't.
Right.
A lot of people who aren't able to express themselves or speak about
right.
what you're trying to get, what meaning was meant to be said or what was being exchanged.
I mean, part of that's why you're comm students, I mean, you think about these things and you can do it. The best, like in that case, you say, are you hungry? Or they say, are you hungry? You say, no. And all of a sudden, you're really selfish. You're like, wait a minute, wait a minute. I'm not understanding what just happened here. Why do you think that? Why? Let's open this up.
Because you'll meet someone that'll be like, well, then you're dumb. You don't understand.
You don't get it. Yeah.
Yeah.
I can't explain it to you.
Back.
Yeah. Yeah.
I've encountered.
I don't know. With people like that, I try to say, if you want to drop it, that's fine. But I'd like to understand what just happened, because I'd like to have a good relationship. I'd like things to work. I'd like to talk about this. I don't know if you're familiar with the I would like phrase. Any of you use this in other contexts?
Yeah.
It's a very important phrase for negotiating conversations. It's easy enough to say, you're crazy. You don't know what's going on. That just creates defensiveness. If you instead reply to these things by saying, when you said that, I felt confused. When you did this, I felt this, and I would like this. So when you said I'm selfish, I'm really hurt and I'm really confused. I'd like to understand where that came from.
And sometimes there's an agenda behind something that, unless they tell you about it, you have no concept.
Which is the episode would be part of the agenda.
About the episode, I want to know what's, like let's say for instance before I came here, my son called and said he was going to go home with me tonight, but he stays on campus. And I'm thinking to myself, first of all, that's a little odd. What does he want? So I said, all right, so you're coming home, you're taking your own car. No. So you're coming with me? Yeah. Okay. What is this about? I know it's not to visit. You know what I mean? So he was saying that he wanted to go home and vote. But that had to be, I was grilling him on the episode.
Right. What is the context of this speaking? What are we engaged in? Are we engaged in a money request? Or are we engaged in a power play? Are we engaged in a friendly visit? What is the context?
People don't want to expose sometimes the episode.
Right, they don't want to well, it's a loss of power to let you know what's going on. Because people can use this episode difference to if you think you're having a friendly chat, but they're gathering information to make a legal case, right, you're caught in a fact that you think that's a simple question for information, but in actuality, it's a data gathering exercise that is going to lead into some accusation at a later point. Right? So the episode question becomes very important to clarify it. And I mean, again, like when you're out with co-workers or fellow bosses or subordinates, and you start to drift over into work talk, it becomes very important to say, all right, what's the episode here? Are we at work or are we not at work? Is this going to be work conversation? If we solve something here, does that mean it's solved at work? You know, what's going on? We want to clarify the episode.